Ramp is the ability to increase the credits you can use each round, even beyond 12 credits. You're able to use more and earlier high-cost, high-value units and orders. This archetype is usually slow in the early until the mid-game and ridiculously strong in the late game. At the end of the January season, this archetype was not often being played, but since more players are trying to counter tier 1 decks with discard or some control decks, US ramp decks are seen slightly more often. This deck list is very strong in the late game against any kind of control matchup, but is weak to high tempo decks such as air, artillery, and aggro. The most popular version of this deck is US and Britain. Variations include US-Japan, US-Soviet, Britain-US, and Soviet-US. Your key ramp cards are the War Machine and War Bonds to get an early credit advantage. In the late game, these cards are used to increase the maximum credits beyond the 12 normal capacity. Combined with early sustain cards like 593rd Jasco and East Surrey Regiment, plus AoE removal like Carpet Bombing, the ramp mechanic leads you into the late game. This deck wants to use the credit advantage to defeat your opponent with high-cost, high-value cards like High Altitude Bombing, TBF Avenger, and US Military Research. This archetype is using the discard ability to remove cards from your opponent's hand. Combined with draw denial, the win condition is to keep the opponent from using their win condition. When the opponent doesn't have any cards or options left, pretty much any unit is able to take down the enemy headquarters. In the January season, the popularity of aggressive decks increased. These decks rely on card draw and are weak to cheap removal. This discard list is targeting these weaknesses and is quite strong against tier 1 decks Brit Air, Arty & Co., but is not quite powerful enough to make it a tier 1 deck itself. The most popular build is a Germany-Britain combo, with variations in Germany-Japan and Britain-Germany. Key cards are those with discard mechanics like U375, Wolfpack and Annihilation, and cards with a draw-deny mechanic like Admiral Hipper, Panther A, and MI5. Arty decks use the unit type Artillery, like the name already suggests. These units can attack any unit without getting damaged. Combined with buffs and tempo cards, this deck can be very powerful in the early until the mid-game. At the end of the January season, this archetype became more popular because of its decent win rate, and was played more often by top players, such as Darkness. The strengths of this deck are the artillery unit type and the tempo potential it wields. With buffs, artillery units are able to destroy nearly every other unit without trading. When removing the opponent's units, you can establish a decent board presence while preparing for the lethal buff combo. Weaknesses are cheap removal cards like Sudden Strike, Tactical Strike, Bloody Sickle, Air Superiority, you name it. Not to mention AoE removals like Carpet Bombing, Empire Strikes, and Root Out the Enemy. The most popular is the Soviet-US combo, with the variation being the inverse. The second tier 1 deck sitting at the top of the meta is Brit Air. As the name implies, it is an aggressive archetype which is based on cheap fighters and bombers combined with powerful buff cards. By using early bombers with a large choice of buff cards, this deck is able to establish board control quickly and build up tempo to finish the game either with several large units or a massive burst combo. Brit Air is one of the oldest deck types in the game, being incredibly popular even before the 2019 World Championship. Its popularity was diminished after the Allegiance expansion released Flampanzer, an incredibly efficient way to remove the buffed 1-credit planes. But since then, this deck has been hibernating, coming back for brief periods of time if the meta allowed it. This deck has remained almost completely unchanged since its glory days. The recent nerf to Flampanzer, making it unable to target air units, has spiked the power of air in the meta, making this deck one of the most popular and most powerful aggro decks during the January and February season. Because Brit Air relies on one specific unit type, air can be hard countered by cards such as Sky Barons or just anti-air guns. But these tech choices are rare and leave the deck weak in other matchups, because bounce to remove large buffs and discard to target the low draw potential are the most efficient ways of targeting air. US tempo decks with Half Track and 99th, as well as German discard decks with Sudden Strike and Wolfpack, have the best matchups without needing to run specific counter cards. The most powerful version of Brit Air is with Japan as the ally, which offers Burst of Fire for massive burst and air superiority for tempo removal. The US ally is a powerful alternative with Greyhound, but it lacks the explosive power of the Japanese version. The key cards are the powerful 1 credit, 1 attack, 3 defense British aircrafts, Swordfish Mk1 and Gladiator Mk1. They are a strong board presence in the early game and work well with close air support to buff something into a massive threat. especially with Hurricane MK, which offers high burst potential with its Fury ability. Another important piece of this deck is Empire Strikes, which offers a cheap AoE that scales with the number of bombers you have and also damages the enemy headquarters. The buff to counter offensive has turned this previously unplayed card into the core combo piece of the best deck currently in the game. This deck uses cheap units and bounce effects to build up a ton of tempo in the early game, and usually aims to finish around turn 7 with a Winter Warfare plus counter-offensive combo to create a massive unit. This deck snowballs incredibly quickly and gets stronger the further ahead you are on board, while being able to burst the starting health total from hand. Without board control, it can be difficult to win when playing from behind, but it's not impossible if you can run your opponent low on cards. Because counteroffensive requires being played on a tank or infantry, you do need frontline control to win. The best single deck against this is Soviet-US artillery deck because of anti-tank gun and Petlikov, but even that is only slightly favored against counteroffensive. The US-Soviet version offers significantly higher tempo plays than the other versions of the deck with Sherman and Bounce, as well as many powerful, cheap units to guarantee early board domination. Soviet-US is stronger against aggressive classes because of 456th Rifle Regiment, but is often knocked out after a single board clear against control. German-Soviet is also a contender with more blitz tanks to buff, but can't compete at the same level because of the lack of card draw. The key combo of this deck is Winter Warfare plus counter-offensive to create an either unkillable unit or to immediately win the game. M4 Sherman is important to refill your hand, and M4A1 is often the best target for counteroffensive because it is unable to be targeted by orders such as Blade of the Samurai. Combined with cards like 99th Infantry Battalion and M16 Half-Track, this deck has amazing tempo potential, getting through guards or buff units, no contest. Special thanks to Team Ammo for compiling this month's meta report. And for more meta reports and cards content, be sure to subscribe to 983 and drop a comment for what deck you'll be playing to the top this season.